There is a message in our DNA. It exists. It's been revealed, it's been read, it's been translated, and by following the instructions left to us in some of our most ancient and cherished traditions, we can now literally read the code of life as the letters of ancient alphabets. And when we do so, our genetic code becomes words, and the words become sentences. Although you may have always sensed that we're here on purpose, and that whoever, whatever is responsible for our being here may have left something hidden for us deep in the mystery of our lives long ago, you may be surprised at just how powerfully you're affected by the clarity of the message you're about to hear, the message that lives in every cell of your body. Well, as you can imagine, the emotional experience that goes along with researching this kind of information has had a tremendously profound and powerful effect on me personally. I've always believed that we are here on purpose, that we're an intentional species, that we're a product of an intentional creation that began long ago. And while I confess I've never fully understood the how or the why of our existence, I am convinced beyond any reasonable doubt. When I see the complexity of life, the complexity of the DNA in our bodies, I know that we're here by design. Now, the precise details of how this is done, I've described in the book, The God Code. That's beyond the scope of everything that we're going to do here today. What I'd like for you to know is those details are available. We're going to do this at a very high level. We're going to do it very simply. All we're doing is now matching the numbers that we've converted the elements of life into to the letters of the ancient alphabets. And when we do that, the modern element hydrogen becomes the Hebrew letter Yud, or Y. The element nitrogen becomes the Hebrew letter He, or H. The element of oxygen becomes the Hebrew letter V, or Vav. The modern element carbon becomes G, or Gimel. All we've done is we've treated the modern elements as we would with gematria, and we've treated the ancient letters as we would with science. We're giving both ways of knowing the same consideration. When we do that, we can now apply these letters to the bases of our DNA, and here's what happens. Every place we see a hydrogen, it becomes a Y. Every place we see a nitrogen, it becomes an H. Every place we see an oxygen, it becomes a V. Every place we see a carbon, it becomes a G. And this is for the first layer, the first level of the message in our cells. So we're converting the elements into numbers. We're converting the numbers into letters. And when we do that, the strand of DNA literally becomes different combinations of those letters for the first layer in the cells of our bodies. Different combinations of the letters Y, H, V, G. Y, H, V, G. What does it mean? What does it mean? Well, the first layer, and this is the key, the first layer to the introduction in the cells of our bodies literally translates into only two words, two very powerful, very potent words, YHVG. YH literally translates into English, and you already know this because we spoke about it, it's the ancient name of God, or the word eternal. YH, Yah, translates to the word God, eternal. VG, or VG, GV in the Hebrew traditions, translates literally into the words within the body. Within the body. When you put these together, what we find is that the first layer of the message in the cells of all life, the first layer of the message in the cells of your body literally translates into the English words, God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. It doesn't say who God is or where God has come from or how the message even got there. It simply says that whatever you consider to be that force, the creative force that seeded an entire universe and our world and our bodies, that force resides within you, within every cell of your body. When we're looking at the DNA bases, they are literally different combinations of these words. God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. Whether we're speaking about an amoeba or a blade of grass or the complexity of a human body, we are literally made, literally made of different combinations. If you translate the chemical codes into the alphabets, different combinations of God eternal within the body. The odds of randomly forming this kind of information, a meaningful four-letter word from the alphabets, the Hebrew language, is about 0.00042%, or about 1 in 234,256. I asked myself this question because we all know if you take enough letters, different combinations from a phone book or War and Peace or the Da Vinci Code, the book of your choice, eventually you're going to get letters that fall together and mean something. So what are the chances that this is a fluke? What are the chances that these letters just happen to be, the four elements of life just happen to be exactly the numbers that link to the four letters in the Hebrew alphabet that just happen to say exactly God eternal within the body? The odds of that happening are about 1 in 234,256. I spoke with some statistician friends of mine, and I asked them, I said, what do those numbers mean? What does that number mean? Because I thought maybe the odds would be, 1 in a bajillion, or something like that. And they said, well, Greg, you have to consider this is a very, very short message. It's only 2 words, God eternal within the body. As we go deeper into the code and the sentences become longer, those odds will increase astronomically. They said, what's important about this? Those aren't bad odds, 1 in 234,256, but they take on even greater significance when we consider, number one, that it's these and only these 4 letters of the Hebrew language that correspond to the only 4 elements that create the DNA through that mathematic link, number one. And number two, it's not that we just made a couple of words. When you put the words together, there's a context. It means something, so that the message itself. Now, we began this project with the Hebrew language because it lends itself to this process through Kabbalah and through the gematria that's been so well preserved. When we researched and applied these same principles, what we found is that this works in other languages as well. It definitely works in ancient Arabic as well. It looks like it works in Sanskrit as well. So what we're finding is that in the languages that cement the spiritual traditions for well over half the world's population, the message reads precisely the same no matter what language you translate it into within these ancient languages. These root or core languages is what they're called. So now when we look at our cells, rather than seeing the sticky, gooey, protoplasmic stuff that somehow magically creates life, what we're looking at is a library. And within that library, those 46 chromosomes we can actually think of now as books. And the long strands of DNA that make up each chapter in each book, we know, are made of the shorter strands that we call genes, that are the paragraphs and the sentences. And the highest level, the very first, the introductory level, the message from the first day of our existence, reads the same for all of those cells. It literally says, God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. It's almost as if you were a life form from another world and you suddenly found yourself here on Earth and you said, I'd like to know about these Earth creatures. What is their history? Where do they come from? I'd like to read the book of their record that they carry within the bodies themselves. And they opened one of our cells, this is what they would find. That this force, this creative force responsible for the entire universe, if we're to believe the text, and for our bodies, it literally lives inside of us as well. God within the body. It doesn't say God's out there somewhere. It says that God resides within us and works through us in this way. The ancient Hebrew texts teach that this name, the divine name that we find in the cells of all life, the very name that was removed over 6,800 times from the original text, is a name that is to be spoken only in one place, in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And I found this very interesting, because if in fact, if we're to believe the texts, and God had a conversation with Moses almost 4,000 years ago, and in that conversation revealed a personal name that we would know God by in this world, my question is, why wouldn't we be able to use that name all the time? Why wouldn't we be able to call to the creative essence that lives in the cells of our bodies and is responsible for life as we know it in our prayers and in our meditations and in times of need as well as in times of joy? Well, I began speaking with the scholars, the religious scholars, and many of the rabbis and the Hebrew scholars, and asking them this question. And more often than not, they would refer me to a passage, one passage in Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verse 5. It says that the place that God will choose to place his name is in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And they interpret that to mean that that is the only place the name should be spoken on the one hand, while on the other hand, only a few more lines down, what we find is that God actually says that this is the name, that his name is the name to be used. It's the name to be used, and that it is dishonoring to use any other name in our prayers. So we have a little bit, I'm sharing this because I want you to be aware, the differences of opinion in terms of precisely how and when this name is to be used. The name was believed to be so sacred that if we did utter the name in the presence of one another, we were to do it with our mouths closed so that the essence of the name would never escape our bodies. It's called the swallowing of the name. So when I asked the scholars and the rabbis where this information actually comes from, who said that the name of God that was revealed to Moses on Sinai is a name that we should never share among ourselves? And the differences in the answers told me that this is an artifact in human interpretation. In the original texts, nowhere do we find the instructions that say we should never say this name among ourselves. So I began to ask the question, what if there's another meaning as to why this name isn't to be spoken? What if maybe there is a hidden meaning, and what if these instructions are literal? Is it possible that there is a special way that this ancient name of God is to be shared in our world? Maybe it's not to be spoken the way we would speak a common name. Maybe it's to be shared in another way, perhaps intoned or sung, as many of these ancient names were. Well, to answer this question, we've got to look at the power of our language and the way that language is constructed with what we call vowels and consonants. The consonants are the letters that separate one language from another. When you speak to a linguist, those who make their life professions of studying ancient and modern languages, they say that the consonants are actually what they call the Tower of Babel between the languages. They are what divide humankind in terms of the way we share information in our world, on the one hand, while on the other hand, the vowels that we are so familiar with, those vowel sounds, are almost universal across every language. The vowels transcend the barrier between languages. The vowels bridge and unify human language together. So my question is this: could it be that the secret of the divine name, the name that lives in the cells of our bodies, is it possible that the ancient instructions that invite us to refrain from speaking this name in the presence of one another as a common name, maybe what they're saying to us is that rather than saying the name through the consonants that divide, the name is to be intoned or sung through the vowels that unite. Let me say this again. What if there was a way to say the ancient name of God, Yahweh, by using the sounds of the vowels that unite humankind through language, rather than by using the common consonants, YH, VH, that divide us as peoples? What would that sound like? Is it possible the name is actually to be intoned? Well, this is very interesting. It led to some study and the work of a colleague and a dear friend of mine, Mr. Jonathan Goldman, who's a pioneer in psychoacoustic research, the relationship between the power of sound and how that sound affects our brains. Jonathan and I have had many discussions about the power of the name of God, the divine name, what it means in our lives, what it means in our bodies. As we researched this together, Jonathan had found that in the texts themselves, there was actually an ancient code that instructs us in precisely this process, that instructs us to create the divine name by intoning the vowels that unite rather than simply speaking the consonants that divide. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you what those vowel sounds are so that you know what you're hearing, and then share with you the actual sound as Jonathan recreates with his voice this intonation of the divine name, the ancient name of God. The vowel sounds are pure vowel sounds and may sound a little different than the way we typically think of vowels. In the texts, there is a specific order. This is the code. This is the formula that the ancients said, when you share the divine name of God among the people of this world, this is the way that that sound, that name is to be shared. So I'm going to state the vowel sounds and see if you can hear the name Yahweh in these pure vowel sounds, because they essentially come across as E, Ah, U, A, E. The vowels E, Ah, U, A, E. And when we create those together as an intonation, it literally becomes Yahweh. And you can hear Yahweh, Yahweh. So the sound that you hear next will be one iteration of this intonation of the ancient name. I'll invite you just to sit back and listen and feel how this sound feels in your body. And what you have just heard may be the first time in a very long time that this sound, the ancient name of God, has been intoned in the way that it was intended. Once again, rather than speaking it through the consonants that divide as a common word, sharing it, intoning it through the vowels that unite.